Hello and welcome back to the DIF 2018. My name's Joe and it's a Friday, the first Friday here at DIF HQ, and we've had an absolutely packed week. We've been to space looking at closed loop systems for interstellar travel, and we've been looking at all different subjects, blockchain, food, design. It's all come up in this first week at the DIF, and we've got 2 weeks left. And today we're going to be looking at food, a hugely important subject, everything from milk and bread to a Bakewell tart or even my favourite, a Scotch egg. Food's a really important part of everyday life, but how often when we reach up for the supermarket shelves do we actually think about where our food comes from, how it's produced and how much food we're using and wasting every single day? It's something that we're going to have to start thinking about a lot more, especially when you consider that 1/5 of the world's population live in China. So what people in China are eating and choosing to buy every day will have a huge impact on the global food system. And that's the topic we're going to get stuck into today with the help of two fantastic guests. Before I introduce them, a reminder, get in touch during the session using #ThinkDiff on Twitter or use the comment section. During the launch party on Tuesday, I kept saying that it was below the video, which is completely wrong. It's over to the side. The comment section's over there somewhere, that side. Thank you, Becky. So use the comment section or #ThinkDiff on Twitter to get in touch, because we really want to hear your voice in the conversation throughout this discussion. So, food in China. We've got an expert on the line joining us from Paris today, Federico Duarte. He's a chef by trade, but currently he sits at the intersection of food, culture and technology. Federico, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And also here in the studio, we've got Emma Chow, who's the lead program manager. Project manager. I knew I'd get there in the end. You're a colleague, I should know that. On the Cities and the Circular Economy for Food and report initiative.
Yep.
Here at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And Emma, we're going to come to you a bit later after we've spoken to Federico about what's going on in China. We're going to maybe look at it in a global context or figure out what it could mean for food systems around the world. But first to you, Federico. Thanks for joining us. I knew you were dying to be here in the studio today, but some travel mishaps got in the way. But first up, food and culture, I think people understand that food and culture do sit quite closely together, but food, culture and technology is a bit of an interesting mix. How did you end up at that intersection?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Joe. I was indeed dying to be sitting next to Emma, but for the lack of that, I'm sitting in front of her digitally. I guess before I do start, there's an important disclaimer that I need to make, and that disclaimer is that I am a cook, and like most cooks, we're really trained to cook, not really to speak. So I'll have to ask you to bear with me through this entire introduction. That being said, I'm going to continue, and going back to your question around what got me into this intersection of food, culture, and technology. Early days in my career, working mostly in fine dining, I realized that the role that I could play as a chef went quite beyond the possibility of delighting through food. I realized that food and chefs in this ecosystem had the possibility to reinforce and then sometimes preserve the economic and social tissue that was around food. And doing that through technology was a possibility that I wanted to embrace. And doing so in China made even more sense for me. So that's how I ended up working in the space in the intersection of food, technology, and culture, and doing so in China.
And so, but you didn't start off in China, did you? I was watching one of your other talks, fascinating talk about narcos that you gave to a room of people, I think in Shanghai. So you didn't start off in China. You've had your career as a chef has taken you around the world.
Yes. Yes, the journey is, I guess, by all means, a little bit atypical. I was born and raised in Colombia, and I did my apprenticeship here in France, and I must admit that originally the idea of going into the culinary world wasn't a fully thought through decision, but what was a fully thought through decision was the idea to remain in the world of food. I remember quite vividly when that happened, and that was here in France, and I had the opportunity to work with a chef in a very remote area of France, and through that work I realized how the role of this chef could impact in a very, very meaningful way the entire community around him. The way in which his presence in that relatively remote area was being able to preserve the social and economical tissue that was around him. How thanks to the presence of that restaurant and that chef, there were producers and agriculturists that were able to remain in business and have a meaningful role in their community. And that really triggered me to stay in the trade and sort of pushed me to moving to China and trying to have a more impactful and different role as a chef in the ecosystem of food.
And bearing in mind that that you've cooked in different countries around the world, probably eaten a lot of food in different countries over the globe, what's different in China?
That's a big question, and there's a number of things that are very different in China. But I think before you go into speaking about what are the specific differences in China, it's quite important to take a step back and realize or at least reiterate some of the things that we don't really say all that often. When it comes to a limitation in China, there's one thing that people often don't realize, and it's the speed at which things have changed in such a small period of time. Back in the 80s, China was among the world's most malnourished countries in the world. Over 300 million people were malnourished and lived under hunger. And as of last year, as of 2017, China just became the world's most obese nation. So in a period of no more than 40 years, China went from being the hungriest country on the planet to being the most obese country on the planet. And thinking about that is extremely important to understand the state of play of food in China today. If you take those shifts in the context of the life of one individual, and try to imagine the impact the implications that it has, that if you're 60 years old today in China, when you were growing up as a kid, your family probably didn't have enough food to eat, and now you're facing with extremely abundant selection of foods to eat, and that is one of the major differences that I see in China, and that have very strong implications in the food ecosystem.
And is China, with these changes that are happening, is China copying other trends around the world or in history? With regards to what people are eating or how much they're eating or how it's being grown or sourced, or is it something? Is it kind of a new path?
I think China is facing some of the challenges that other countries are facing in the West. China is certainly tackling them in a different way, and China is also seeing challenges that other countries around the world will face in the future, in the near future. Take an example like take an issue that's been on the media quite prevalently lately, like animal protein consumption. Meat consumption is a big topic in China, just as big as it is around the world. Now, it's the way in which China is looking at this transition is actually quite different. Coming back to that very fast shift in the diets of China. 40 years ago, in the 80s, China was, for the most part, pretty much a vegan country. China doesn't have set aside a few regions in the country, doesn't have a culture of consuming dairy, for example. And animal meat, was reserved only for certain celebrations during the year. So an average Chinese would only consume a few kilograms of meat a year. Now, with the very rapid shifts and the changes in lifestyle and diet, China is very, very quickly picking up in terms of meat consumption, reaching not quite as much meat as we consume in the West, but reaching levels that are quite high. And that's creating for a very challenging yet interesting circumstance here in China. And there are driving forces that create very. On one hand, for example, you have the government. You have the government, which has a vested interest in seeing the consumption of animal protein being reduced. But on the other hand, you have citizens wanting to consume more beef. How do you conciliate those two tensions? How do you conciliate general interest and an affair of public health with the desire to consume more meat from consumers?
Just we broke up for just a moment there, but we got pretty much all of what you were saying, I believe. It's interesting you're saying that there's a aspiration or a desire to consume more meat. There's a trend towards that, but it sounds like as well there is an awareness, as in other countries around the world, here in Europe, especially. There's an awareness that meat consumption, we need to keep it in check. We need to reduce it or consume different types of meat, grow it in different ways.
Yeah, there is a collective consciousness in China that China cannot reach the levels of meat consumption than other countries, and that brings for another interesting tension, which companies in this case will need to sort of figure out. China is consuming, in average, per capita per year, around 60 kilograms of animal protein. When you're a meat producer and you look at those numbers, you can have one of two interpretations. You can either say, there is a gap that I can fulfill and I can incrementally grow my business in China, or I can explore what probably needs to happen to create a more sustainable food ecosystem, which is look at different alternatives to animal protein. And that tension is one in which companies, big and small, are having to position themselves. Do we push for China to consume more meat because they can, and that could potentially create economic value? Or do we push for different solutions that are harder to achieve, but potentially what should be done?
And there's a sense here, I've heard it said before, that food is such a sensitive topic for the government to get involved in, because it's such a personal topic that telling people what they should or shouldn't eat could be political suicide. What's this story in China? How involved is the government in influencing food trends?
Yeah, I think that's another top subject that we don't usually speak too much about, and it's the role that the government has in dictating or at least influencing the ways in which people live in China. Very recently, a few months ago, the Chinese government published the Healthy China 2030 plan, which includes a massive amount of recommendations in terms of diet and lifestyles. Includes ambitious goals as reducing the consumption of animal protein by 50% between now and 2030. And those are goals that no other government in the planet has set out in such a clear manner. So to the question of who is driving, who is pushing for this shift to happen, a big part of it is being done by the Chinese government, actually. Now, that is not to say that the execution of the implementation of these changes is going to be done, or that the heavy lifting is going to be done by the government. The ecosystem is actually quite robust in China, where with a strong support of private capital and a large pool of innovators, those government and high-level guidelines get then implemented and carried on by innovators and companies.
Just a quick reminder to the audience, get in touch using hashtag ThinkDiff or the comments section. We want to hear your views on this topic. Maybe you've changed the way you eat, what you choose to eat just naturally or through a conscious effort. Or maybe we're talking about China. Have you been to China, witnessed any of these food trends in action that Federico is talking about? Federico, just before we move on, a couple more questions from me. You've said a couple of times, maybe it was just a turn of phrase, but you said a couple of times there's subjects we don't talk about, like the role of government. When you say we don't talk about them, do you mean internationally there are things that aren't shared beyond China, or do you mean within China itself?
I think internationally we don't talk enough about what is happening in China.
And do you think by that I get the impression you think there's more that we could be learning around the world from what's going on in China?
If I can answer very personally to that question, the reason why I am in China, I'm born and raised in Colombia, partly French, but the reason why I'm in China is not necessarily because I am interested only in the Chinese market, but because I fully acknowledge the potential that China has as a way to inspire the rest of the world. I like to think that in the food industry, we conduct this things called accelerated aging tests. When we create a new product, we put it under certain conditions to see how it would age in time, sort of at an accelerated pace. Well, I find that China has a similar effect over businesses and ideas. Because of scale and speed, it allows for these ideas to run this test at an accelerated pace. And I think not only because China accounts for a fifth of the world population, but also because of that, we should be looking at China for inspiration about how to solve the big challenges that we have in our food ecosystem.
And on that note, you work in this, as we said before, this intersection of food, culture, technology. What are some of the technologies or trends that would really blow people away, a non-Chinese audience away about food consumption or production in China? There's a bunch of them, but recently I've been very interested in one that is quite atypic and quite interesting. China, as most people know, is very, very well connected. The permeability of technology in people's life is very, very high. To a certain degrees that at times seem to be a little bit unimaginable. One subject that I've been particularly interested about recently is how live streaming and other communication technologies are bridging rural with urban areas. We have observed in China over the past few months and past few years the emergence of a good number of platforms that enable farmers and people in rural communities to communicate and share their life and their products in many cases with urban communities. And that's just one simple example of how a piece of technology that we do have everywhere around the world is being used in a very different way in China. It's being used to create awareness, to make for a better living for rural communities. It is being used for a better transparency to get consumers connected with what they're eating and where their food comes from. So I think China is quite interesting, not so much in creating new technologies, but in taking sort of interesting applications of technologies that are already existing, like that one. Thank you. We're gonna get some reflections from Emma now. Emma Chow, who's been in the studio very waiting patiently and listening, as we all have, to the insights from China, from Federico. So reflections, Emma. You've been looking at the food system, not just in China, but around the world. Yeah. And how does this stuff land? Is this something that's very different to the global system, or what's the relationship between China and the rest of the world?
Yeah, I've been sitting here nodding my head at a lot of things that you're just talking through, Federico, because one of them for sure, and has always been a big topic of discussion for our team and many other organizations working on food issues is the topic of meat consumption and proteins, and recognizing in OECD countries we're seeing beef consumption especially declining as that consumer awareness grows. But then when we look at where these booming populations are in places like China, that's where wealth is accumulating, and it's becoming part of a status symbol. It's becoming part of the everyday culture and diets of eating more beef in particular. So it's a question of, or rather an opportunity of, how can we create food products that are using more diverse protein sources that are making delicious food the default choice for people to diversify the types of proteins they're eating, so that we can help divert from perhaps a trajectory that is not so good in the long term. So that was one of my top reflections coming out of it.
And you focus specifically on a circular economy for food. And people who, hopefully, people at the DIF have been going through the circular economy learner journey, or maybe they're already familiar with the topic and know that a circular economy, according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, is made up of these 3 principles: design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate natural systems. You can find out loads more about that at the DIF. There was a session a couple of days ago, Circular Economy in 30 Minutes, that I would definitely recommend. But how is that being applied, or how are you seeing food through the lens of circular economy?
Yeah, so our first step was really looking at those 3 underlying principles and saying, if we apply these to the food system, what does that mean? And we realized there are 3 key areas to investigate and where we can apply these principles. The first one being how we're growing food, and Federico was also alluding to that, of connecting the farmers and looking at the food production side of things. And how do we not only grow food that's healthy for everyone, but food that's grown in a way that's also healthy for everyone. And often we are unaware as end consumers of the pollution, the air pollution, the water pollution, the pesticide exposure, all of these negative health consequences that are happening as a result of the way that we're producing our food. So that's one area that we've been looking at and saying, how can we do it in a way that's regenerative for natural systems? The great thing about working with food is we're working with nature, and nature inherently gets back to its equilibrium. It's regenerative, it's resilient to shocks, and saying, how can we work with the system rather than the more industrial, linear practices that are often being used.
So I get what you're saying there, that because a lot of these things are animals and plants, they grow, they live for a while, they might produce some sort of fruit, but then they die, and there's no waste. It's a natural system, as you say. But that concept is a long way removed from the industrial farming methods, or the really large scale farming methods that we need to produce food to feed a global population. There seems a huge gulf in that, and I guess what I'm getting at there is, how easy is it, or can we really believe that we can kind of turn the ship around? We've got this farming system now that, as you describe, it's destructive and extractive. That sounds like a pretty difficult beast to turn to something better.
Yeah, it is. It is a tough challenge, and
Where do you start then?
Well, going back to the animal production too. When you think that about 70% of all cropland is used to grow animal feed, that's such a big chunk in itself. And so then you think about the innovations and the new ways of producing proteins that don't necessarily need all that land to produce all of that food. And so that is a way that we can plug in some of the innovations to overcome some of these big challenges. And when you also think about what's the alternative, yes, we need to feed this booming global population, but if we continue down the path that we're headed right now and with these industrial systems, we're going to degrade our soil so much so that we won't be able to feed anyone either.
And we said at the top of the session that the area you work in is cities in the circular economy of food. China obviously has a few rather large cities. What's the connection there? What's the city connection?
Yeah, so we realized that cities, because they have this really unique intersection or concentration rather of lots of people, plus lots of businesses and economic markets, plus universities, learning institutions, and innovators, that they are consuming a lot of food, and in that sense, have this demand power to shape the upstream and influence the brands, the retailers, as to what they're bringing to market and how they're sourcing it, and get to those producers, the farmers, all the way at the beginning of food production. So that's one aspect. And then coming back to the innovation side of things, because you have this network of testing ideas, like what Federico was saying too, of China is this great testing ground where you can stress test some of these new products. You can do the same thing in cities because the markets, the people are there. You can test new products and get that quick feedback, and also share between stakeholders and cut between the private and public sectors too.
I'm just going to take one question we've had from the audience, which I think we've touched upon it a few times, or kind of circled around the question. Someone said, does it mean that we all need to become vegan or vegetarian? You must get this question a lot.
Does not mean we need to do that at all. What's really interesting is with livestock raising too, it can be done in a way that's also part of a regenerative, healthy ecosystem. For instance, managed grazing. So if you think about raising some cows, you have some nice green fields. Well, what some farmers will do, and this is what's called managed grazing, is you actually move the cows around to different plots, and they chew down the grass to the point that's actually in its prime growth stage. And because you're moving it around, the grass is sequestering, pulling down carbon from the atmosphere. So it can actually be a net sink rather than a source of carbon. So when you're doing it in a smart, integrated fashion, raising livestock can actually be a really good thing, and therefore you can also be eating the meat from those cows or livestock that you're raising.
So it might not be the end of the carnivorous
Yeah.
human. We're going to be back with our guests in just a moment or two, but firstly we're going to hear from Anna, who's going to tell us what else is coming up at the DIF, or things you can catch up on that you might have missed.
Hi guys, Anna here. Yesterday, Zach Peaster and Dale Walker explored the fact that 4.5 billion people have not benefited from the rapid pace of technological innovation. If you want to hear what that's all about, go to catch up and watch Blockchain, The Forgotten Ones. Today, we launched Hamilton Enrique, a story of food revolution. In this 11-minute-long film, Hamilton Enrique tells us how he created Saladorama, a social business that provides healthy and accessible food for many in Brazilian favelas. He involved everyone in his community to create a whole food ecosystem because he believes in the power of social businesses and local economies to really drive positive social impact. Coming up this Monday at 5 o'clock UK time will be one of our top shows from this year, Materials and Making in the DIF Studio. It features Zoe Lochlin, who will be doing some live and dangerous experiments right here in the DIF Studio. If we're really lucky, she might be burning Joe Owls' beard off. So these are my top 3 picks for this year's DIF.
I've only just heard that news about me having a fiery haircut on Monday, but it is overdue, so maybe it won't be much of a bad thing. Okay, so we've got some really good questions coming in. Some of them are for Federico, who we're not actually sure if he's still with us.
He is.
He's still here. We can't see you, Federico, but we've got some good questions that I feel like you're the guy to answer, so I'm going to ask them to you anyway. So someone said, if you were advising the Chinese government on a food policy for the future, what 3 things would you suggest that would help move towards a resilient food system?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that that's a place where I would like to find myself advising the Chinese government on food policy, but I can take a humble crack at that one. I think the Chinese government did when you look at what the Chinese government did to enable the progress in terms of artificial intelligence and mobility in China over the past decade, by creating government guidelines that encourage businesses to jump on board of that innovation track. I think doing a similar thing for food would be an excellent initiative. In that sense, favoring a transition to a more sustainable diet, like they're doing right now with the reduction of animal protein consumption, is a great start. I think the one thing where I would like to see the Chinese government being more involved is in creating the right spaces to favor collaboration between innovators and food corporations, whether they're Chinese food corporations, private or public, or global corporations. I think that would have an important role creating the infrastructures to facilitate those exchanges.
And you said you wouldn't like to find yourself in that position. Thanks for having a crack at it. A position you're more comfortable in is as the founder of Yeast Labs. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. What we do at Yeast is a company builder. So what we do is we build companies, and we build companies that solve large food, or that try to solve large food issues in the space of food using technology. And I guess the cut that we take into building those companies is that we build those companies in collaboration. We build those companies in collaboration with large food corporations. We build those companies in collaboration with communities and also with local authorities.
And can you give any examples of the type of companies that are being built as part of Yeast?
Yes, absolutely. In the subject of a circular economy of food, we were involved in a very interesting project, which is led to China's first packaged silkworm snack company. Interestingly enough, China is the world's largest producer of silk, and the byproduct of silk is silkworm, which happens to be packed of protein and actually quite delicious. I grew up in Colombia, in a region where we eat ants as a delicacy. So I have an inherited pleasure for eating insects. And one of the companies that we were involved with helped create a packaged snack using the byproduct of the silk industry.
What does it taste like?
It's pretty damn good. It's pretty damn good. It comes in 3 different flavors: angry Sichuan, if you fancy spicy food, original, or Italian leek. We developed that. The founder of that company is an Italian entrepreneur who has been in the business of edible insects for quite a while.
What do you think, Emma? Sound good?
I haven't had those, but I'd be willing to try.
I ate a giant water bug at the DIF last year.
You did?
It was horrifying. But those sound much nicer, I've got to admit. Last question for you, Federico. Joe's picked up on this point you made earlier, that the shift from malnourishment to obesity in 30 years. Just quickly, what are some of the big conditions that have led to that?
Rapid urbanization. Rapid urbanization is one of them. A growing middle class with a stronger power of acquisition, and a changing lifestyle. A changing lifestyle that involves a lifestyle that's much more sedentary and that requires people to move less. And that has led to those conditions. So
that's some of perhaps the pitfalls of a urban sedentary lifestyle. But a question we've had in from the DIF chat box is, for you specifically, Emma, what's one of the more exciting or innovative food city initiatives that illustrates a shift towards a new food system?
Oh. There's a lot that we've uncovered. One of them is actually a city that we're working with in Canada, which is Guelph, Ontario, and they are actually a finalist now for $10 million Smart Cities Challenge to be a data-driven circular food economy. And they're in an agricultural area of Canada, and a great example of having a research university that does a lot of work in agriculture, a city authority that's really dedicated and committed to this. And they're going off of Federico's point of the advice that he'd give the Chinese government to create spaces for innovation. They have this Civic Innovator program, which is not only a physical space, but a way that they pitch challenges, and they're planning to do this with food challenges relating to circular economy, to small, medium businesses, local entrepreneurs, to then bid, and so they can test those solutions in this small city that it is, and then scale up. And they're close to Toronto, so it's really great to think about these opportunities as they commit to this space and really accelerating their transition, which influences the whole Canadian, North American landscape.
So that was Guelph in Canada.
Guelph, Canada. Yeah.
Guelph, Canada. That's the place for food city innovation, according to Emma. Okay, a lot of what we've spoken about has been pretty kind of high-level stuff, big trends that are going on in China and elsewhere around the world. But what would it actually mean for the food in our fridges and our cupboards? I've got a 4-course meal here for Federico. You're just going to have to observe, I'm afraid. You won't be able to taste any of my tasty treats. But Emma, you've got the pleasure of Chef Joe's delights today. First course, please. What have we got there? What's that, Emma?
Sausage.
That's a sausage. That's cow's finest sausage. What might this sausage look like in the future? It's pretty linear at the moment. But what might change with regarding something like a sausage?
Well, it might look just like it does today, but what's inside
I hope not. That looks horrible.
It looks quite unappetizing. I don't really want to eat it. But the ingredients would be quite different to what might potentially be in there today.
What do you mean?
There might be only plant-based protein. There could be more of a mixture, substitution of some of the animal protein with some plant-based protein. You see some products that companies are coming out where they're not getting rid of all the meat in the product,
but
they're
mixture.
Substituting some with some mushrooms and ingredients that can mesh well with the meat.
Maybe so stick a few silkworms in there.
Yeah, that could some crunch too. Something crickets in there.
Federico, what do you think of this sausage? Is that going to change much in the future?
I think sausage is a great example to ask that question. I mean, it's interesting to look back at the reason why you eat sausages and why we came up with sausages in the first place. We came up with sausages because we were completely unable to master our supply chain, and we didn't have fridges, and you know that's a necessity that's far behind us. So I don't know if sausages are going to change. I'm eager to try to make a silkworm sausage for sure. But I think what would be interesting is to have people ask themselves why we eat what we eat. Because if we ask that question about sausages, we'd probably end up eating a lot less of sausages and cold cuts in general.
Last question about the sausage. This is processed food. Is that a no-no in a circular economy for food, Emma?
There's still processed food, because most of the food that we eat is processed to some degree. It's transformed at some point between the field to when it gets to our plate or the grocery store where we buy it. And for a lot of reasons, it's for health and safety and preserving an item or pasteurizing it. Of course, there's a spectrum of processing, and we can over-process food, or we can put in ingredients that don't give us any nutrition. And when we talk about circular economy, we're also thinking about the downstream and the byproducts in the food processing and then after we eat it.
So if your food waste had nasty additives in it, you wouldn't want to keep cycling it
Right,
out.
it could contaminate.
Okay.
And we can't use it for something valuable and
Okay.
useful.
Right, let's go on to the second course. Similar shape. Emma, what have we got here?
A carrot.
It's a carrot. Vegetable production.
Yes.
What's going to change in the future?
Well, we definitely, as I was speaking about earlier, like to see food production, including for something like a carrot be done in a way that is good for the ecosystems, good for natural systems, more connected we're getting more logical supply chains from our fields to our cities especially. Right now, it's quite dysfunctional. And how can we bring it closer? If carrots are being grown 15 kilometers away, why are we eating carrots shipped in from all over when it's being grown?
People might not realize the extent to which that happens now. That happens a lot, that something might be grown a few miles away, but we're still shipping them in from overseas or long distances.
And sometimes they can follow some crazy paths to go and get graded and then aggregated and then distributed. So how can we do more of that using technology, especially to connect the primary producers with the end consumers and leap over some of those extra steps?
And Federico, vegetable production in China, there's some innovations going on over there, isn't there? Maybe not.
Yeah.
We've still got you.
Yes. Some of the another thing that we don't speak too much about is Chinese plant factories. China is, as of 2016, China launched the world's largest scale indoor farming vertical farm. And there are very, very strong plans to develop that in China. So I think one of the things that hopefully that carrot would be different in the next coming few years. It might not come from the field anymore, but it might actually be produced in the city.
And let's move on to the main course. I've been looking forward to this one. Yum, yum, yum. Seaweed. You weren't expecting that, were you?
No.
You don't see it on many menus.
No,
Tell me about seaweed. Is that going to play a role in our future food system?
Seaweed's a really interesting one. We've come across a couple of really neat cases. One of them is on the west coast in the US, off the coast of California. They have ocean farming, as they call it, and they're growing all sorts of kelp and other species, very diverse system. But the real goal of that, and they do produce edible products, seafood products, but is to suck up a lot of the bad stuff that's running off of the farmland nearby. So seaweed's very powerful in that sense of soaking up and filtering out some of those bad things for the oceans. And then there's also one neat product that we came across at a conference in Italy earlier this year, and it's a Dutch company, but they found a type of seaweed that naturally has the flavor of bacon. It doesn't have, I have tried it, doesn't have the crispiness and texture of bacon, but from a flavoring perspective. So it's pretty neat. Like we're just starting to really uncover some of these
very nice
products, yeah.
You've used seaweed in your cooking, Federico?
Yeah, I think seaweed as a chef and the role a chef can play in this entire conversation is how can you explore ingredients that you usually don't cook or that you're not exposed to. A lot of chefs across the world, certain of them in China, working with products that we usually don't serve in plates, that people usually don't see in their dining tables, seaweeds being one of them.
Let's move on to the final course, dessert. Oh, steady on. You're not very good at this. Thank you to the Becky, fantastic waiting staff today. A beer to close out the meal on a Friday.
Yeah.
Tell me, beer's going to be
available. Beer is definitely available, and beer is really cool because they're already in the beer industry. We see quite a few examples of what the circular principles can mean when it comes to food. And just off the top of my head, one of them is Canvas Drinks takes spent grain from beer. So the beer industry creates a lot of spent grain that has vitamins, fiber, some protein, and can be used for other food products like protein drinks. There's another company out in California that's doing granola bars, protein bars. And then there's one beer company in London, Toast Ale, that takes bread that otherwise would be wasted and uses that along with some grain as their inputs.
We've just got 1 minute left, so I'm going to take 2 super quick questions. That one, I'm actually going to take one because Colin Webster's question is just foolish. We've had a question for you, Emma. Can you summarise a circular food system in the style of a recipe?
Oh.
A sprinkle of this and a teaspoon of that and a quick blitz with a blender.
Oh my gosh, in the style of a recipe. Okay. You would, first of all, you would not create your recipe first. You would account for, maybe you'd think about what kind of flavors you'd want, but you'd come at it from a design perspective and you'd think, what's grown around me, what's in season, what's available, and how is it grown? I'd only want to be using food that's grown in a way that's healthy, both for people and for ecosystems. Then I would create my recipe, and I'd keep all of the extra bad contaminants and additives that could be bad later on out of the picture. As I'm making my food, if I'm grating up that carrot and I have all these other pieces that I can't eat, I'm definitely not throwing that in the trash or to landfill. It could turn into compost to go back to a local farm. It could be turned into other products that we're seeing, some new innovations. And I would eat my entire meal and not waste any of it.
That is quite a complicated recipe. That's difficulty level hard, I think. That's one that I will need some assistance from a professional chef like Federico, perhaps. We're out of time here at the DIF today, looking at the subject of the Chinese food system, what it could mean for the way that we choose and consume food around the world. But thank you to both of the fantastic guests here in the DIF studio, and thank you to you for joining us online. Tune in next week. We'll be back with a whole new week of amazing DIF content, loads more in store. This is just the end of week 1, so make sure you stay tuned for everything else we've got coming up throughout this year's online Festival of Ideas. Thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next time.